Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Striketh, and today we're taking a look at the Arachnid quarter from the first wing of Naxx. As you can see here, there are 4 neutral cards that came out in this wing, along with 2 different class cards, one in Druid and one in Rogue. I'm going to be doing a video on each wing as it comes out, and covering the different cards and what I think of them and some potential uses for them in decks. So let's just go ahead and hop into it. So, as you can see here, we have the Haunted Creeper, the Nerub'ar Weblord, the Nerubian Egg, and Mixna. These are the first 4 neutrals that you get, and the cards are interesting to say at least. So, the Haunted Creeper. Death Rattle, summon 2 1/1 Spectral Spiders. Now, a 2-cost card gives you a 1/2 as well as 2 1/1s. So, all in all, it ends up being a 3/4. Which is pretty damn good for 2 mana, although it is split out between 2 1/1s who have no life, and a 1/2 is also very easy to deal with. So if you're up against a Druid, for example, they could very easily just knock one down and then swipe something else on the board and take everything out. But what makes this card annoying is that it persists, so you can kill it easily enough, but then it comes back as 2 1/1s. So if you don't really have anything to deal with this, then it can be kind of a very sticky card that's tough to deal with. And for control decks, they don't like sticky cards. So it's going to be interesting to see how this is utilized in decks. I could very much see perhaps maybe even a Paladin utilizing this with Blessing of Kings. You're guaranteed to have that card next turn unless they really go all in and trying to remove it. So you can always just buff it up next turn to remove something. Now, of course, it's susceptible to silence, like every other card in Naxx pretty much, all the ones with death rattles and such anyway. But are you really going to use a silence on a 1/2? I don't think you would. At least most people shouldn't use it. So the card could be interesting. I mean, it's not very expensive overall, and it's not a game changer by any means, but it's not a bad card. Now, the Nerub'ar Weblord. Minions with Battlecry cost 2 more. This is really good actually, because there's a lot of minions in the game that have a Battlecry, and making them cost 2 more is going to benefit you quite a bit in the long run. Let's look at one of my other decks here. Okay, so Battlecry. Summon 2 1/1 Whelps for your opponent. Leroy Jenkins is going to cost 6 mana with this card out. And of course, this applies to any other card with Battlecry. So, considering that this card only costs 2, if used strategically at the right time, it can be a very, very good card and very useful to have in your deck. So, I really like this card. In my opinion, this is one of the best cards to come out in this wing. It's a 1/4, so it's not easy to get rid of, and it only costs 2 mana. And the effect is fabulous. So, I really like this card. Now, the Nerubian Egg has been talked about a lot. It's a 0/2, so it costs 2 mana to do absolutely nothing on your board. And when it dies, it summons a 4/4 Nerubian. So, you have a 4/4 if this dies, but until it dies, it's just sitting on the board doing nothing. So you have to find some way to trigger it. With a Rogue, you could use something like an SI Agent or a Backstab. With a Mage, you have different abilities that you can use on it. With other classes, you have different things you can do. You can even use Reincarnate when it comes out. So, even with a Druid, you could add a taunt onto it, right? So, you drop a taunt onto it, now it becomes a 2/4, or if you use the other card, it could be a 0/6 or a 4/2. And now you can actually use the card, and when it dies, it summons a 4/4. So there's different ways to utilize this card, but again, it's susceptible to silence. So if you silence it, now it's a 0/2 forever, and it does nothing. But the good thing about this card is it also shuts down AoE. As soon as this card comes out onto the board, if you're a mage and it's turn 7 and you have Flame Strike in your hand, you're not going to want a Flame Strike anymore, because as soon as you use Flame Strike, well, now they have a 4/4 on the board. So I'm not really entirely convinced that this is going to be easy to get rid of, at least with a lot of the current decks running around. People are going to definitely have to make concessions for this, but ultimately, if possible, the best way to deal with the Nerubian egg if you're up against it, is to just ignore it. If they don't force you to attack it with a taunt, and they don't do anything to remove it or anything of the sort, just ignore the card. It can't do anything as a 0-2, so not really a big deal. The only really big exception is if you're up against, say, a shaman. You don't want them to have a bunch of cards just sitting on the board because bloodlust. You know, that 0-2 can become a 3-2 and ruin your day. So, hopping into the last card here, Migna, or Mixna, however you want to pronounce it. Destroy any minion damaged by this minion. So, it's a 6 for 2/8, and you're like, oh wow, so anything I attack with this will get destroyed. That's so cool. It's not amazing though. I could see this being used in a hunter deck, perhaps. You can basically give it charge because it is a beast, and as soon as you drop it, you can charge it, and voila. Or you could even use it in a warrior deck, I guess, with the charge card if you want, but that's a lot of mana. It's not a great card. It doesn't really combine with a lot of things very well. So, I mean, you could drop it, and then you could give it taunt. So you can make it like a 4/10 or something like that. And, you're like, oh wow, that's crazy. It's got so much HP. It's so tough to deal with. And everything that attacks it dies. So it could definitely get some use, but I can't see it being an amazing card right now. Hex, Polymorph, Silence, anything of the sort will work extremely well on this card, and then it becomes a 2/8, and it's kind of sticky just because it has 8 health, but it's not threatening at that point. So I'm just really not convinced this is a fantastic card. I personally probably won't use it, but I'm sure there's some people out there that might have some ideas that I haven't thought of yet that might use it. So let's go ahead and hop into the class cards. We'll do Druid first. Poison Seeds has also seen a lot of discussion, but we'll go ahead and talk about it briefly. Destroy all minions and summon 2/2 Trents to replace them. So, it does exactly what it says. Now, it doesn't work like Force of Nature. These don't have charge on it. They have the 1 turn cooldown, so as soon as you summon them, you have to wait until next turn to use them. So, this card might be really awesome against like a Handlock who has 2 or 3 Mountain Giants or Molten Giants or whatever on the board. They can face this Manipulator them, so if you've really messed up, they might have 5 Giants on the board or something, and you're like, oh my god. So Poison Seeds could easily help with that. You use this card for 4 mana, destroys everything on the board, and it will trigger Death Rattle, so you have to be wary of that. But it'll destroy everything on the board, replace it with a 2/2. And this could be a good equalizer for Druid, because right now, Druids don't really have a good way to deal with big creatures. Yes, it does have Naturalize, but it's not something that I would ever really use except as a finisher, because if you don't kill your opponent, well, now you've just given them a 2-card advantage, and it's very possible that they've just drawn into the win. So I don't really like using Naturalize except as a finisher. For example, if I've got the Savage Warrior Force of Nature combo, that's 9 mana, but there's a Mountain Giant taunted up standing in my way, well, I can just use Naturalize on it to get rid of it and then hit him in the face, because at that point I don't care if they draw cards because I'm killing them. So that's a good use for Naturalize, but this can be used at any time, although it is definitely very situational. If you just throw out a Poison Seeds, then you're giving your opponent 2/2s as well, and they could taunt them up, they could buff them, or they could just kill all of your minions on the board. So you have to not only have a board advantage, but you have to have some follow-up to this. If you just use Poison Seeds and you don't have a follow-up, then you've pretty much just thrown the game. So I don't really know how much use this is going to get. I mean, I definitely bet that a lot of Druids are going to run it for a while and see how they can make use of it. But if you're up against like Zoo, for example, this is a pointless card. You don't ever want to use this against Zoo. So I just don't know how this card is going to work out in the meta in the long run. But I definitely think it's a very interesting card, and I think it is actually a card that Druids needed. So I'm very interested to see what we can come up with as far as deck builds go. Lastly, the Rogue card, the Anub'ar Ambusher. Death Rattle, return a random friendly minion to your hand. This is not a terrible card. It's a 5/5 for 4. However, its death rattle is kind of a negative. Basically, if you have a strong minion on the board, you drop this, it dies, and now it returns that minion back to your hand. There's a possibility of 1, milling yourself and losing that card, or 2, losing the game because that card that you need to do damage next turn is now back in your hand. So, now if you have the ability to silence this minion, a 5/5 for 4 isn't horrible, but it's going to kind of defeat the purpose. So, I think that it's okay. It'll definitely see usage, and people are going to have to be creative in how they use it, but it definitely has some advantages too. For example, let's say you have a taunt, and you dropped a taunt minion on the board, and you've taunted up one of your creatures. Now you drop the Anub'ar Ambusher, you go ahead and kill him off, or your opponent kills him off, and it returns the taunt card back to your hand. Well, now you can play that taunt card again, and go ahead and have another taunt on the board. So this could also work to your favor as well. So you could kind of use it as a brewmaster of sorts, so just return cards to your hand for free. But you'd have to be very careful in how you used it. So it would definitely require some setup and definitely some coordination in how you play your cards in order to make it work with a death rattle in a positive way. But ultimately a death rattle is a negative, and that's why this card costs 4 instead of 5 or 6. So that's the cards that released in the Arachnid quarter with this first wing. I think that overall, there's definitely some game-changing stuff in here. The neutral cards especially have some really good ideas, and it's going to be interesting to see how people start changing their decks up. I feel like Zoo is going to unfortunately get even more powerful, but that's just the name of the game. And I'm looking forward to the next wing next week. Stay tuned for more videos, and I'll see you next time. This is Striketh, checking out.